Journalists from Africa, the Middle East, South Asia and Cuba are being honored for enduring danger to do their jobs. The Committee to Protect Journalists singled out 5 individuals, among them a photographer who was detained for 2 years in Iraq. Jim Fry reports from Washington, where the organization announced its awards on Thursday.
Covering a war can be one of the most dangerous assignments for a journalist. Amid the fierce fighting around Fallujah, Iraq in 2004, Associated Press photographer Bilal Hussein was part of a team that later won the most prestigious U.S. journalism award, the Pulitzer Prize. But it was 2 years later in another city that the photographer was detained. The U.S. military claimed Hussein had links to insurgents. He was held by U.S. forces for 2 years, during the time Stephen Hurst was AP's Baghdad bureau chief.
However, he was never, I repeat, never charged with a crime.
Now, Hurst speaks in Washington, D.C. for Hussein, who is among 5 journalists receiving this year's International Press Freedom Award. The Committee to Protect Journalists named the recipients Thursday: Danesh Karukel, Farida Nexad, who run an Afghan news agency, and a jailed Cuban reporter, Hector Maceda Gutierrez, as well as Ugandan editor Andrew Mwenda. As rebels in Uganda's north continued their 20-year civil war, Mwenda in April launched a news magazine critical of Uganda's army. He's been arrested 11 times this year. Even on this day,
when my staff were going to report for work, they found our offices surrounded by the army of Uganda.
the risks the journalists face are the same: arrest, bodily harm, sometimes even death. But the causes in each of their countries can be quite different. Zimbabwean human rights lawyer Beatrice Matetwa is receiving the committee's Lifetime Achievement Award. She says President Robert Mugabe's office is behind the enforcement of laws that restrict journalists.
There is continued repression. If you went to Zimbabwe today, you would be arrested for doing your job.
In Uganda, Mwenda says while some parts of the government often arrest him for his coverage of torture, Ugandan courts still act independently.
We are contesting them in the Constitutional Court. The courts always release us.
The Afghan journalists say they frequently face reluctance from their own government in Kabul to support press freedoms. And in the provinces, it can be more dangerous. They say in the south, where the opposition Taliban supports the cultivation of poppies, one of their reporters was beheaded.
Actually, I can't say it is Taliban and we blame Taliban all the time, because maybe it is some other issue. And
Bilal Hussein was picked up by U.S. forces in Iraq, Hurst says, for his images documenting a vigorous offensive with
photographs that the American military really didn't want the world to see.
The Committee to Protect Journalists each year honors those who risk imprisonment and worse to stand for the right of journalists to report the news. Jim Fry, VOA News.